Okay, so let's take a dive into the village place. The existing land uses were a mix of civic, retail, industrial. The industrial you'll see in brown, located closer to the village core here, as well as a scattering of vacant parcels or underutilized parcels throughout the study area. And make sure. Melina, you should be able to unmute yourself. I'm going to turn it over to you to go through the market analysis summary.
Yep, it just worked. Thank you. Yeah, so after completing a market analysis, we looked at some of the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and challenges or threats in the Village Place area. And as we went over in the first public meeting, a lot of the stuff that we identified from the market is very similar to what you all see as your strengths and challenges in this area. I would primarily highlight, as Cecily has been talking about, the walkability, all the amenities, some of the redevelopment, like the brewery that has already occurred, really makes this a very special place and with a lot of opportunity from a market perspective if people want to capture it. Next slide.
Give me just a moment.
Okay, I was like, maybe I'm talking and no one's hearing me.
No, I am hearing you. I just clicked off that screen. I apologize. There we go.
Oh, no problem. The other thing that we do at the end of a market study is really think about what is the market opportunity. And as I'll talk about in just a minute, that's one of the inputs that they take into when they consider design for the different places, the small areas. But we're focusing on Village Place. So look at all the different land uses and think about what's the overall market opportunity for that land use and what would be the appropriateness for that land use in Village Place. And that's what the square is circling on the left side. So as you can see from a market perspective, most of the land uses have a pretty strong opportunity in this area, with the strongest ones being the residential, retail, and hospitality. On the right side of the screen, it talks about, from a market perspective, again, what would be the amount of development that could happen every year, and also think about what would be the amount of that product type at build out. So, build out could be many, many years in the future, but sort of if it was all finished, how much of each of those land uses are there? I'm not going to read you what it says, but the planners take that into consideration when they go and think about what different land uses to put in the area.
Great. Thank you, Melina. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, continuing on with Village Place, as we heard from you all in workshop 1 and then looked at all of the existing conditions analysis, including Melina's market analysis, but also the physical conditions and constraints that we found, talking with the key stakeholders and conducting those interviews. We combined all of those various inputs and created a list of an approach to, before we started planning, of how we would tackle Village Place and what were the main takeaways from all of that. So in terms of character, mixed use and walkable, certainly reflective of the village center, as we saw in the comments, and particularly for the area of McCaskill South, closer to the village center, and making sure that buildings, both in architectural detail, but also in massing and materials, echo what we see in the village center. We want to protect, respect, and connect to, but not compete with and drain the village center. That's very important. We want to address, especially in that area north of Community Road, what might be considered blighted, the blighted character, and where those areas could be infilled to bring in new development to help knit that back together. We wanted to evaluate the 1 to 2 stories and the potential of going up to 3 stories, and we'd like your input on that tonight specifically. For land uses, McCaskill South, we saw as mixed use, very similar to the village center, focused with a focus on restaurants and retail here, some office as well, professional offices. And then as we move north on Rattlesnake, we see that turning over to infill residential, where you find, for example, residential on the east side of Rattlesnake. We echo that on the west side, and start to infill that with a little bit less retail uses, still some professional office, and mainly residential as we move up. Again, we have, as Melina will tell you, there's only so much depth in the market for retail and restaurants. We want to concentrate them where they have the best chance of success and can build off of things like the Pinehurst Brewery. We want to, sorry, let me drag this up, incorporate new open spaces as we plan, and we'll share our thoughts on that with you. For transportation, you'll see us connecting streets through the areas. We have some super blocks that are currently a little bit out of scale and not very walkable or bikeable. You can't get through the areas, so it tends to push people around, whether they're walking, biking, or even driving. They need to circumnavigate areas to get around, and that puts, for example, traffic onto some of the small residential streets east of Rattlesnake. So creating that connected street network will help to diversify traffic and give them alternative routes, and also access the new uses. We'll take a look at some of the crossing roads through that McCaskill South area, connecting to Power Plant Road, Spur Road, McIntyre, and then as well north of that area, Medlin, making extensions or connections to Medlin, Kelly, and other roads north of McCaskill. We want to make sure that we take a look at, there was an ongoing study which was already going forward, which we gave input on, which was adding in new sidewalks along Rattlesnake and Woods Road up near Cannon Park. So we gave input on that. And we wanted to make sure we connect to trails and destinations. And we are, have been selective of where we put in new sidewalks in existing residential areas, because we want to be mindful of the frontages that are there and the historic character. Drag this out of the way. Okay, so that led us to this plan that you see on screen. We call this our block diagram. You can see the existing roads are the solid gray, new proposed roads are dashes, and we'll have some options for you. This shows one scenario. You'll see in our low intensity and high intensity plans, some options of where those streets connect. You'll see the red dots signify where there are existing dead ends currently in the existing plan. So some of this is just making the logical connections through areas, again, those areas that are pretty much super blocks, and making connections that echo the curvilinear form of the streets and the smaller blocks that we find in the original Olmsted plan. Again, here you see the existing street network with those existing dead ends. And then as a counterpoint to that, you can see the new street network laid over with the proposed footprints of new development that are coming in. Again, you can see south of McCaskill, a connected network, and then north of that, some optional roads through this area west of Rattlesnake. These recommendations really echo what came out of the 2011 Pinehurst Thoroughfare Plan, as well as the 2019 Comp Plan. There are two distinctions that we'll make from that. One is this plan, although it cuts off, this is Rattlesnake coming up to the north here. You'll see that there was a thought to have that road come directly through and then even continue south of Orange Road to Dogwood Road. You'll see in our plans that we've purposely shifted that half a block off and connect rather just to the west of the plumbing parcel here, and then connect either to Power Plant Road or to Orange Road here, coming through this area. The east-west road, interestingly enough, really is the spur road that was the rail line that came through this area. So it's really reestablishing that as a street, which at one point was a rail, then it was just a service road, and now reconceiving that as a street. Again, having this connected network through the area will help to divert traffic and disperse traffic rather than coming into this area of small residential that we see to the east. We know sometimes people cut through Woods Road, Medlin, or Kelly Road to get to the village center as they travel south from 211. So here we see up on screen the existing open space. What you'll notice, and is very clear, is that there really is an abundance of open space on the periphery of our study area and even within the study area. So it's well served in volume, but then there's a lack of space as we move to the east and south. And we want to make sure as things are redeveloped that we are incorporating new open spaces, as well as make connections to the greenway trails and the sidewalks that already exist. So here you see the proposed open space and pedestrian network, where you'll see streets with sidewalks added in the dashed orange, trail connections continued through, shown in pink. And again, creating that network that establishes this as a walkable area. You'll see, and we'll show you in more detail, the central green added here south of McCaskill, where the current service yard is for the village, as well as an amphitheater in this corner directly across, or catty corner, to the village hall. Here you can see in a little bit more detail with some precedent images keyed to those. So we have a visual. We'll share with you another visual of what that amphitheater could look like with a little bit more of a Pinehurst feel, but you'll see that tagged to this corner of Kelly Road Extended and Magnolia. So that sits at that corner. The new central green here at McCaskill and McIntyre. And then one of those triangular greens that are kind of quintessential of the Olmsted plans that kind of complete that space and the intersection of the roads. Here you see a rendering that gives you a visual of what that amphitheater might look like at the corners of Kelly and Magnolia. Again, here in the key plan. It takes advantage of the sloping topography there. It would be right across from the Arboretum and the Village Hall, so it would be an expansion of that space. And it's one of the facilities that we talked with the village planning staff about, having long been considered for this area and needing a home within the village. As you'll see, there are these deep cascading tiers, which would allow for both seating, casual seating as you walk trails and want to rest, read a book, but also can accommodate some of those tall pines, which help to occupy the space when there isn't a performance, so that this will feel nice and occupied and shaded to some extent, even when there isn't a performance going on. Take a little bit of a dive into what we call the low intensity plan. I will note that the program, which our facilitators can go through in a bit more detail with you, but this plan shows infill development that spans over 20 years in the low intensity plan. When we contrast that with the high intensity, it will really take over 30 years to build out according to Melina's analysis. So it's important to note a couple of things when we look at these plans. That they are not a prescription for private developers that they have to follow and exactly place buildings and streets exactly where they're shown. This gives us an idea of how development may occur so that we can write those development standards and create framework plans, which will then allow each developer and private property owner to come in with their plans, be evaluated against the framework and development standards, and be approved or not approved accordingly. So again, this gives us an idea of what can fit, and it allows us to test it out and sets a stage for private development. But what you'll see here is, again, the extensions of roads. We don't have any roads extending through this area in the low intensity plan. You'll see those in the high intensity plan. In the low intensity plan, you'll see road connections that come through from McCaskill heading south and connecting to the stub of power plant road that exists. The east-west connection comes right by the brewery company. It's where the parking lot currently is, and then connects over to Spur Road, again, following essentially the same path that the rail once traveled. And then we connect to McIntyre with the community green at that intersection. You'll see, again, as I mentioned before, a concentration of restaurants that restaurants like to group together. So the Pinehurst Brewery is there, it's doing great. We'd like to situate some other restaurants to help feed off that energy and build off of that new street network. As we move north of McCaskill, we start transitioning. The Greens at Arboretum has an approved project to build this building on the corner, so we've shown that there. It's a mixed use building, and we start transitioning to some smaller commercial infill, likely office, transitioning to residential across from the existing residential as we move north. Along Magnolia is a location for additional civic use buildings when there's a need, as well as that amphitheater. There's a small pocket of infill residential that's envisioned here on the property just at the corner of Magnolia and McCaskill. Okay, for the high intensity, if I toggle one more time through that, you'll see that we've started to infill the streets here with a bit more residential and the roads connecting through. The types vary a bit, and we've integrated a bit more single family attached. The other scheme, the low intensity, shows a bit more single family detached. The spur road, or sorry, the road that comes north-south connects to Orange Road instead of to Power Plant Road. The east-west connection, it remains the same. As I mentioned, it's important to note that this will not occur in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 years even. We're really looking, again, for the low intensity would take 20 years, the high intensity is 30 plus. That will far exceed the duration of the small area plan. Typically, we write plans that we anticipate being revisited every 10 years or so. So this lays out a framework because we do not know exactly which private property owners and developers will come forward for their plans. So we did look at the entire study area, but it isn't going to all happen at once. We would love for a catalyst of the new roads invested by the village to be built here would help to catalyze development in this area. That is what's going to benefit people the most, building off of the village center. But we don't dictate, of course, when people come forward with their own development plans. Here are some of the precedent images that we pulled, given the feedback that you gave us in workshop 1, as well as going back and looking at some of the comp plan images that you pulled. We're looking at things that have that same character, a lot of clapboard siding, the 1 to 2 story range of residential in the top row, looking at more mixed use and commercial in the second row, where we are starting to look at live works that might be incorporated, and we'll point those out in plan. Some residential above retail or restaurant on the ground floor, potentially a hotel in the high intensity plan envisioned across from the brewery site, and other potentially small 1-story retail. In the streetscapes, we are trying very much so to echo, and you'll see that in the street sections, the brick sidewalks, those groupings of evergreen trees, with some deciduous, but some, keep that evergreen character of Pinehurst. We looked at Mashpee Commons, which is up in Massachusetts, as a New England town that was redeveloped on largely a strip mall, but that really brings in some of the same principles that we've been talking about tonight, creating a walkable destination, mixed use, et cetera. Parking will be accommodated either in parallel parking, angled parking, and also in surface parking lots that are relegated to the rear and sides of buildings rather than in front of buildings. We looked at other precedent images on open space that looked at the amphitheater, some attached greens, corner plazas, what could happen for art festivals in the evening, and where people can gather in plazas. And all of these you'll be able to give your input on in the breakout session. You'll see here on screen a blow-up plan. Just to orient you again, McCaskill runs to the north here. Rattlesnake Trail is coming in here. You can see that new north-south road that comes through just west of where the plumbing property is. The service yards happen in here. You'll see a new green that actually repurposes one of those shed buildings to make an open air pavilion that could be used for events in the central green. You'll see sidewalks and parallel parking that come through, as well as buildings lining the streets. Again, we see a concentration of restaurants and retail building off of the success of the Pinehurst Brewery and coming down and connecting you to Community Road here. That infill small scale residential, filling in the sites here. Our street sections, the typical commercial, again, we're trying to incorporate that the planting area that is both stormwater management, buffer, and accommodations for those evergreen grouped plantings as well as low plantings. You'll see parallel parking incorporated on the typical streets, crosswalks that echo the same bar pattern that you have currently in the village. And generally these streets within the areas that we're looking at are 2 lanes, 1 in each direction. Let's see, we do advocate that, especially in that core area south of McCaskill, that the same street furniture, benches, street lights be used to echo the character of the village center. The residential, very much the same. You'll just see that instead of having sidewalks that go to the building face, they're now 5-foot sidewalks, brick sidewalks again. Otherwise, travel lanes, the only difference between commercial and residential is that they narrow down from 11 feet in the commercial to 10 feet in the residential typical section. Rattlesnake Trail, as I mentioned, we took a look at, this is a section of the existing condition of Rattlesnake as we come closer to 211 near Cannon Park. Cannon Park would be just over here on the right. We envision, there is a sidewalk, I should say concrete sidewalk on the west side. Eventually that could be replaced, but we do see the plans that are already being installed to connect to the new school are showing a brick sidewalk on the eastern side of Rattlesnake connecting to Woods Road and then transitioning to a clay sand path as you move into the residential areas east of Rattlesnake. Here is a rendering that is in progress. We are showing to you as Linework. This shows the core area again of Magnolia Road is here, McCaskill is here, Rattlesnake is coming down. So this is that new intersection of the new streets coming in. You'll see that there's surface parking that's relegated to the rear, as well as a good lining of buildings along these core new roads that come through. Other kind of hallmarks or landmarks that you'll see, the Pinehurst Brewery here, and the Manor Inn anchors the corner of Community and Magnolia Roads. The infill residential echoes the character of the adjacent neighborhood, goes from small cottages to larger manors or villas as you move to the larger scale residential here. Coming down to street view, we're now standing at the intersection of those 2 main streets, east-west and north-south streets in the village core area just south of McCaskill, where we've proposed new Liveworks, the potential of a hotel, a restaurant, as we mentioned, next to the brewery. You can see in the golf cart parked in the parallel parking here along those new streets. And some of the furnishings like the standard street light and park bench or bench that we find in Pinehurst. Okay, so I think we're a little over time, but wanted to get through that. We're now going to go to the breakout rooms, and Mackenzie, I'll ask you to go through the protocol for the breakout rooms so I can get everyone set up for that.